Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, a mini cabinet shuffle brings Mark Miller back into the fold.
It's nice. Look, I got into politics because I love my country and want to contribute to it.
The longtime Trudeau minister and personal friend of the former prime minister is back in cabinet, taking over Steven Guilbeault's identity, culture and official languages portfolios in a mini shuffle forced on the prime minister after Guilbeault quit cabinet over a pipeline deal with Alberta. We've got all the latest details coming up in moments. Then, Algoma Steel cuts a third of its workforce in Sault Ste. Marie.
Prime Minister looked them in the eye and promised he would protect their jobs.
We absolutely have every confidence in the Algoma workers as they're going through this hardship.
The tariff-battered company cuts 1,000 jobs after getting $500 million in federal and provincial loan support. We're going to bring in the union representing those workers coming up in moments. Plus, pipeline lifeline.
If we can agree that the oil tanker ban is going to stay in place, then let's have those conversations.
We want to have as much benefit for British Columbians as we possibly can, and that includes British Columbia First Nations.
After weeks of tough talk, our BC's David Eby and Alberta's Danielle Smith seeking some common ground. Our front bench is set to dig into that possibility. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie will all be here, coming up a little bit later on in the program. First, though.
I'll just say that I'm honored by the trust bestowed on me by the Prime Minister. It's an important role in federal politics and in Quebec politics, and I look forward to getting to it.
It feels great. I am a guy that likes to be busy, and so I was a little restless, but it's nice to get the opportunity to keep on doing some amazing work and contributing to Canada, like for the reasons that I got into politics, because I love my country.
A small shakeup to the Prime Minister's cabinet necessitated by Steven Guilbeault quitting the Prime Minister's inner circle over the federal pipeline deal with Alberta. While there have been rumblings of a bigger shuffle to come, today's was small, addressing only the files held by Guilbeault himself. The big news out of the mini shuffle, though, Mark Miller is back in cabinet, taking on Canadian identity, culture and official languages. Procurement Minister Joël Lightbound adds Quebec Lieutenant to his plate, and the nature file is added to Julie DeBruzen's Environment and Climate Change Ministry. Our Judy Trin is on location at Rideau Hall, where the swearing-in took place this afternoon. She's with us for a bit more of a breakdown. Hey, Judy, good to have you here. Tell us a little bit more about Mark Miller, because this, to me, was the big headline out of the mini shuffle.
Absolutely, Vashi. Other names have been floated in terms of this shuffle, but Mark Miller came as a surprise. He was a Trudeau loyalist, a close friend, and now he is back in the inner circle. He's also a good communicator. In his new role as Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity and Official Languages, he is going to have to be a staunch defender of Canada in light of what's happening south of the border, Trump's 51st state remarks that still continues to percolate amongst some members of his administration. So he's going to have to stand firm on that. And he is also, Vashi, as you know, one of the strongest ministers when he was under Trudeau, right? He was not afraid to go on the attack, and he was not afraid to take a certain stance, and he was good at getting the messages across. So that return to Mark Carney will strengthen cabinet that way, but he brings along with him that baggage of being closely affiliated with the Trudeau regime, and that is something that the opposition party will continue to use against Mark Carney.
Yeah, you have to think the first time he was left out of cabinet had a whole lot to do with his proximity to the former prime minister. Talk a little bit, Judy, if you could, about sort of the politics around this. I know, speaking to a number of people who were, staffing some of the ministers, there's a lot of people who were feeling uneasy about the departure of Steven Guilbeault. It was creating, it is creating some political issues for the prime minister. What kind of hole does he leave from a political perspective that the Prime Minister will have to address?
Well, before Guilbeault entered politics, he was an environmentalist. He was with Greenpeace. He's known for scaling the CN Tower to fight for the environment and climate change policies. He said when he was resigning that he couldn't stomach the fact that policies that he fought for were being dismantled. Things like the carbon emissions, the emissions cap on oil and gas. So those things that he cared deeply about and that he could not stomach being in cabinet cabinet, had to take on a role, step back. So he's still in caucus. But what's I think important to point out too is that the experience of Mark Miller in terms of defending, I guess, Trudeau, he is now going to be part of that defense in terms of caucus unity. I asked him today, his experience that dealing with those issues under Trudeau and how is caucus unity now. And he said that in terms of the members, a lot of them still owe their election to Mark Carney. He was able to turn that around, but he says that members are still going to voice their opinions and he expects that to happen. But Mark Miller is going to bring those skills in terms of being a person that can hopefully rally and get other people on side to the Carney agenda now that he's part of this inner circle again, Vashi.
Okay, Judy, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much for your reporting. Appreciate it. Our Judy Trin on the grounds there at Rideau Hall. We're going to have more on the cabinet shuffle coming up with our front bench a little bit later on. We've got to turn, though, right now to some really significant developing economic news here in Canada. Algoma Steel has issued 1,000 layoff notices today at its plant in Sault Ste. Marie, more than a third of its workforce there.
Prime Minister looked them in the eye and promised he would protect their jobs, that he would negotiate a win, and I quote, have a deal by July 21st, but it was a bait and switch that is costing people their livelihoods.
Our thoughts are with the workers affected by the unjustified and unjustifiable tariffs. We absolutely have every confidence in the Algoma workers as they're going through this hardship, and we will make sure that we support them.
More promises and more liberal thoughts will not put food on the table of those out-of-work steel workers.
And yet, Mr. Speaker, when they had a chance to vote for expansion of EI, for easier access, longer duration, and more generous benefits, they voted against it.
The company, hit hard by tariffs, has been the recipient of major government supports to the tune of $500 million in loans, $400 million from the federal government, $100 million from the Ontario government, but says in part in a statement, Algoma Steel has been significantly impacted by the unprecedented tariffs imposed by the United States. These tariffs have fundamentally altered the competitive landscape and sharply limited our ability to access the U.S. market. The statement from Algoma Steel goes on to say, as a result of these pressures, Algoma has been forced to conclude its long history as an integrated steel manufacturer and close its blast furnace and coke-making operations in early 26. Algoma will transition to electric arc furnace steelmaking at that time a year earlier than previously anticipated or planned. Joining us now is Mike Duprat, president of the United Steelworkers 2251, which represents the majority of the workers who are being laid off. Hi, Mr. Duprat. Good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time today.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit to people watching tonight about the impact on the workforce there. It's a huge number of people who receive these layoff notices, particularly as a portion of the overall workforce. How are they doing? In what can you tell us about the scope of this?
Well, obviously, they're very upset. They're stressed out. We knew it was coming, but we didn't know quite when. So what happened is originally when the EAF project was announced, there was some financing provided from the governments, but they never consulted with the unions to see if there should maybe be some conditions with respect to the workforce. Subsequent to that, in 2022, we negotiated a letter of agreement regarding the transition, and it contained a number of mitigation strategies. And the mitigation strategies were to allow people to be re-educated, learn different jobs, and to try to start a helper program that would allow non-trades to help trades. And again, the government gave money, and again, they didn't consult with the unions. Again, they didn't provide us any conditions to that money that would help us ensure the mitigation strategies would be implemented. And what we're left with today is that we're in an arbitration case on contracting out, where the mitigation strategies section of the letter of agreement, the company is saying expired on July 31st, 2025. And nothing could be further from the truth. So now we're going into the litigation. In the meantime, the workers are wondering, what is the union doing? And this is what the union is doing.
if I could just follow up, just to be clear. So I think if I interpret this correctly, so the government at different points has offered financial assistance and not attached that assistance in any way to ensuring that there aren't layoffs.
Absolutely. And there may not have been no layoffs, but certainly there should be conditions where work that needs to be performed could be performed by the workers. That's the commitment in the collective agreement.
And we reached out to the government to get their response because it's not just there's been previous financial assistance, but there's very recently a substantial amount of money that the government, both in Ontario and the federal government, have agreed to loan Algoma. We reached out to get a minister on. Nobody was available from either government, unfortunately. What is your message to those governments tonight, following this news?
Well, they should recognize that we are taxpayers, and it doesn't matter which party we support. We are their citizens, and they should be at least taking care of us. We're not asking them to find us jobs, but what we do want is for them to attach conditions to funding that says common sense needs to prevail and the workers need to be considered irrespective of what's happening with the company. We're not asking for handouts, but we're asking our workers have brought this company back from CCAA 3 times now. So we should be recognized by the government for attempting to keep the economy going. And at a minimum, they should have said, what are your mitigation strategies to ensure that these people are either retrained to work elsewhere or retrained to work at Algoma? None of that has happened.
Are there any mitigation strategies in place? Like, is there any efforts that you can recognize on the part of the company in that vein?
Well, the mitigation strategy were to be create a transitional trades helper program, enhanced and extended training opportunities and considerations, obtaining DZ license for operating heavy equipment, stationary engineers, vibration analysis, etc., extend training periods, leave of absence to attend educational programs. None of that has occurred. And in fact, they're saying that has expired. The company has had some discussions with agencies such as CSTEC and Employment Insurance Canada. But again, none of those can start until someone is actually laid off.
And so that isn't the full layoff doesn't take effect until March. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And I wondered if you could speak for a moment, because my understanding is this is a big chunk of the workforce in Sault Ste. Marie. How substantial, from your viewpoint, is this to the overall operations there?
Well, you're talking 900 people. This city cannot provide employment for 900 additional job seekers. So there's either going to have to be out-migration, or people are going to be left without jobs and without income. There's opportunities in the mines, but I understand that there's been a lot of applications, which means that openings are limited, even if there are any left. So for the community, it's going to be a significant impact.
Has there been any outreach from any politician at any level to your union?
Terry Sheehan contacted me yesterday. He's our Liberal MP, and he said that he was going to raise issues about CSTEC and employment insurance, etc. But the reality is that the mitigation strategies should have been tied to the funding, and the government should have stated, you need to start implementing them now. It's too late if you wait until March. People will then be laid off.
Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. DePratt. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We are going to take a quick break. We're going to unpack what you just heard in the political consequences of these layoffs. With our front bench, we're also going to take a deep dive into that cabinet shuffle, the mini cabinet shuffle, and what it says politically. Brian Gallant, Lisa Ray, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie join me after a very short commercial break. Back in a moment.
This is a portfolio to make sure that we are able to radiate arts and culture across the country, making sure that our official languages are respected. It is an important portfolio with a lot of pitfalls that are not obvious. Minister Guilbeault did an excellent job in the time that he had to keep that going, and I want to continue his good work.
I look forward to getting to it with I'm sure with the advice of Steven Guilbeault, who's been an outstanding Quebec lieutenant and minister for years, and he's still in our caucus, and I know I'll be able to count on him as I go forward in this new role.
The aftermath there of a cabinet shuffle forced on Prime Minister Mark Carney after Steven Guilbeault quit cabinet mere hours after the federal government's energy agreement with Alberta. His main portfolio of Canadian identity, culture, and official languages, as you saw there, goes to Mark Miller, a longtime Trudeau-era minister who was left out of Carney's post-election cabinet, while Quebec Lieutenant goes to Joël Lightbound. In the Nature file is being rolled into Jolie DeBruyson's Environment and Climate Change Ministry. Here to break down the political significance of that is our front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Ray is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former NDP leader Tom Mulcair is with us, as is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief Rob Benzie. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Lisa, I'll start with you. What kind of hole has Steven Guilbeault left, and how do you think politically the Prime Minister is trying to address it with this shuffle?
Well, 3 people to replace one. That's not a pretty bad explanation of how important you are in cabinet. Yeah. I am going to give thumbs up to Joël Lightbound. I have always liked him. I served with him in Parliament. We sat on a committee together when I was in opposition, and I think he's really bright. I think he's taken the Canada Post file and done very well. And it'll be very interesting to see how he fleshes out being the Quebec lieutenant for the government. Mr. Miller returning to cabinet, interesting to me only because with him coming back comes back all of the Trudeau stuff, because as we know, very close to Mr. Trudeau and very important part of his cabinet. And Nature's gone back to where it should have been, which was part of Environment Canada. But I wouldn't say that anyone should get too comfortable in the seats that they're in, because there's got to be a bigger shuffle coming.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there'll be a more substantial one early in the new year. I sort of have the sense that, Tom, this was less about sort of an external message and more about an internal one. I think there were a lot of people, particularly among staffers who work for the government, who were upset at the departure of Steven Guilbeault. And it feels like bringing back someone else from the Trudeau era might help address some of that, particularly when it becomes a concern, among caucus as well.
Really good point. And there were a couple of people who fit that bill. Jean-Yves Duclos would have been the other one out of Quebec City, but Lightbound that we just spoke of, he's out of Quebec City as well. So you're always trying to look for a regional balance, and the Libs do very well in Montreal. And Mark Miller is part of it. He's a super smart guy. You can't be more bilingual than Mark Miller, and he understands the very complex issues of official languages. He did make himself quite a few enemies on the radical separatist side when he was at immigration, so we'll see if that enmity continues through on official languages. It's a very tough file to handle when you're a Quebec minister, but I think he's going to do well because it is a complex file and he's a smart guy. I'm thrilled that Lightbound is finally being handed the football on being the Quebec lieutenant for Mark Carney. Mark Carney needs a Quebec lieutenant who's got the pulse of the place, not just Montreal. There are 2 Quebecs. And by the way, this isn't unique to the province because we see the same thing out west. We see it in BC. Very big urban-rural divide. But the 9 million people in Quebec are just about evenly split between the 4.5 million in Greater Montreal and the 4.5 million in the rest of Quebec. Lightbound gets the rest of Quebec much more than Guilbeault did. Even though Guilbeault came from a region, he spent all of his adult life in Montreal, and he didn't have that feel. Lightbound does. He knows the secret handshake. He knows what's going on. He'll be able to talk to mayors and what we call prefects, who head up regional councils around the province. He'll be out there making sure that he understands what people are talking about and thinking, and bringing that back to Carney, but also spreading the gospel of why they're making this decision or that decision. I believe a very wise choice on the part of Carney, putting in Joel Lightbound.
Brian, do you know the secret handshake? Is my joking. What is your take on the degree to which politically the exit of Guilbeault is going to affect the Prime Minister? I think it's more than I thought it was last week, just given all the conversations in the past few days from people who were particularly worried about caucus cohesion as a result.
Well, let me start off by saying I agree with my colleagues. I think most of their points I would check marked all of that. I actually was at McGill at the same time as Lightbound, and we even had a class together. He was smart, thoughtful, personable. Did not show me the secret handshake,
No.
however.
We're off the panel now.
That's right. And you make a really interesting point, and going to your question, the point that you made that I found really interesting is the idea that maybe this is a signal internally. And it's funny because I actually took it the other way around. I think Mark Miller is very capable, as my colleagues mentioned, but what I think he did and stood out on previously was the idea that he was a good defender of the government on the internal political stuff. Like, he was not afraid to go after people. So to me, it was almost the opposite. It's kind of like this is a way to get an ambassador now for the government to sort of quell these things on the outside. And I thought Miller was quite effective at that over the last few months of his tenure in cabinet beforehand. To your direct question, I think that perhaps, and this is just me assuming, that Carney and company may have just sort of awoken to the idea that this is a bigger deal than they might have thought it was going to be. And especially the Prime Minister himself obviously has lots of skill sets, but being in active politics wasn't one of them before he started about a year ago. So this might have been for him an experience where he says, wow, this is really something that can happen, and it doesn't necessarily take all that much. One decision and one person of significance in the cabinet leaves. It's probably a moment for him to remark and try to see how he moves forward with it.
Yeah, and I do think, like, regardless of what you think of Guilbeault's views, like, he was a person of significance in that in that government for a lot of people who worked for it. That was more my point about the internal politics of it, Binzi. Like, I think Mark Miller is known as someone who can attack Pierre Poilievre, and certainly that's the way the previous government thought of him. But the reason he was left out of cabinet the first time is because he was Justin Trudeau's best friend, and he defended him until the dying day.
Yeah, but unlike some others who were dumped from cabinet by Mark Carney after the Trudeau era was over, Mark Miller wasn't out on Twitter complaining about being disrespected as some others did. And I think he played the long game because life is long. And I think I agree with what Lisa, Tom, and Brian have been saying about the changes. They aren't. This is tweaking beyond a small group of people in this country. Most won't notice any change. But I think Mark Miller is partisan in a way that will rally Liberals behind closed doors. But I think he's also, as Judy Trin said, a good communicator, and they need that. The government. Carney himself is a pretty good messenger for the government. I'm not convinced he has that many great cabinet ministers in terms of front bench people who are able to sell the government's message out there. I think it's a real area that could use some improvement. I don't think Champagne did a terrific job selling the budget, frankly. Now, there were other things at play, so that we were talking about that instead. But I think that Carney clearly needs more ministers who can communicate, and that's where Mark Miller helps him. And also losing Steven Guilbeault. Here in Ontario, Guilbeault is a very polarizing figure. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, couldn't stand Mr. Guilbeault because of all the federal meddling on environmental assessments, and they were doing handsprings at Queen's Park that when Guilbeault left cabinet.
So I do want to get everyone's take on the reason Guilbeault left, that MOU between Alberta and the federal government, because we've seen sort of an evolution of some of the reaction to it as well. And I'm going to start off just by playing a clip from our program over the weekend with the Premier of BC, David Eby, who expressed basically a lack of opposition to the idea of an additional pipeline, but doubled down on opposition to any changes to the tanker ban. And then right after, you're going to hear the latest reaction from Premier Smith to that comment from Premier Eby. Let's take a listen to that.
No, I think we can have those conversations. My anxiety is about this oil tanker ban, which is the foundational social license piece for tens of billions of dollars of investment in BC that is nearing final investment decision, and tens of billions of dollars of investment that is medium term as well, like expansion of the Port of Prince Rupert and so on. And so if we can agree that the oil tanker ban is going to stay in place, then let's have those conversations. I think that would make life a lot better and easier in British Columbia in terms of our relationship with coastal First Nations. And would definitely take down the temperature and maybe enable some creative solutions.
Well, I understand the concern about going through kilometers of channel and the issues that have been raised. I understand that concern. But when I look at Port of Prince Rupert, and I just encourage you to do the same, when I look at Port of Prince Rupert, a lot of those issues don't exist there because it is right on the ocean. And I think you've got tankers going to Alaska around those same waters. And so I think that there has been a demonstration that we can do that safely. And that's what we've got to demonstrate, is that we can do these things safely. We want to have as much benefit for British Columbians as we possibly can, and that includes British Columbia First Nations.
So Lisa, substantively, they're not on exactly the same page, but tonally, both parties are way less antagonistic. What do you think is behind that?
I think they both want to blame the federal government if this doesn't happen. And they've picked the right topic, which is a federal issue, straight up, about whether or not what kind of marine vessels are going to be able to ply the trade on the west coast of the country. And it's actually a good fight to pick, because you can see the emotions on all sides. And it's not an easy one for the federal government to wade into and reverse. In our government, we avoided having to have the tanker ban because it's so difficult to unwind. So you try to find other ways to mitigate the real concerns about damage should there be a catastrophic kind of ship accident out in that part of the world. But the reality is, I think they also took a look and saw the fact that Canadians don't necessarily mind pipelines anymore. Maybe did a little bit of a gut check in terms of how they felt about it, meaning Premier Eby, and just decided, maybe the path of least resistance and just let it happen and let other people take the fight instead of the NDP in BC taking the fight for everybody.
Yeah, the fight was so pronounced for a few weeks. And then as I was conducting that interview with Premier Eby, Tom, I literally said in the interview, why are you you seem so much less angry than you were for the past 2 weeks. That's how much of a difference it appeared. What do you think is behind it?
I think that Premier Eby realized that he can't have his cake and eat it too. He can't say, on the one hand, he wants his tens of billions of dollars for big LNG terminals and the like, and then on the other hand, that Alberta, which in the middle of this crisis we're having with the United States, look at what we just talked about with Algoma Steel, it's a very real crisis. What is the best way to grow our GDP quickly? It's with our natural resources. Carney is playing this with Tim Hodgson very well. They've put all their cards on the table and said, you have to be able to give me this. We've got to be able to say we're going to accomplish that in terms of greenhouse gas reductions, and then it's a go. I couldn't agree with you more, Vasha, when you talked about the tone. I found it astonishing. I was sort of going, is that AI? Is that somebody pretending to be Danielle Smith? Because it was so pitch perfect. She was accommodating. She was reasonable. She was understanding, showing empathy for her provincial cousin. So I think that BC is going to be able to walk away from this thing with a win and get all of the big stuff that it's been hoping for. Alberta is going to have a lot of work to do because, it's not easy and there's no proponent. And they've got until July 1st to come up with something. But I think that there's been a shot of adrenaline in the arm. And just to complete the thought, why do we talk about growing our GDP? Well, there's this little thing in Canada that we call equalization payments. And guess what?
Yes.
If everything continues to Algoma, then how is that money going to flow to the provinces that are in desperate need of that money? So I think that everybody across Canada is saying, okay, this is the pragmatism that Carney's been preaching. And I think that a lot of Canadians are starting to be on board saying, we've really got to act. This is that serious, what we're going through with the United States. It's taken a while for that to become real. Well, 1,000 families being told that in a couple of months after Christmas, they don't have a job, that's real. And I think Canadians are starting to get it.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, though, there wasn't, the political opportunity that both Premier Smith and Premier Eby found was to go at each other. What happened in the last 2 weeks to change that, do you think?
It feels to me like the time before the MOU, it's a bit more theoretical.
Right.
So they're kind of putting their stakes in the ground, and they're like, never will I ever allow this. And of course, we're going to do this. And it really sort of made this theoretical debate all that much more sort of polarized. So I think now that the MOU is out, I think I agree with Lisa and Tom in the idea that EB's trying to say, well, maybe I have to look like I'm a little more pragmatic here because people are seeing some of the benefits that this would cause. I obviously don't want to completely change my position, so I'm going to look a little bit more kind of reasonable and willing to sort of be amenable. Meanwhile, Smith is telling herself, I'm sure, okay, I got that first step, now I got to get this done. And to get this done, I can't be necessarily as sort of heated as I was with EB beforehand, and I really got to start to have a tone that's going to help people feel that this project can happen and that they want to be a part of it.
Last word to you on this, Benzie.
No, exactly, Vashi. This is something that is too important to the nation. The reason that Premier Doug Ford here in Ontario is so enthusiastic about this pipeline is it's a potential client for or customer for steel, Ontario Steel. We've got this terrible situation with Algoma. We need more mega projects. The steel industry needs more mega projects like this in order to help withstand what's happening south of the border with this attack from U.S. President Donald Trump and this 50% tariff on Canadian steel. So I think people from across the political spectrum, Vashi, are buying into this because they know that these are extraordinary times. We're in a war, a trade war, but it's still a time of an existential crisis, and we need to actually start thinking about things with longer term thinking rather than just, a gotcha moment here and there. And I thought Tom's bang on. I was astounded by Danielle Smith's measured approach. Now, she's just had this convention in the weekend, UCP convention. She got some aggro from the Alberta separatist crowd. But you know what? Good for her for defending Canada. And I thought she comes out of it stronger than she went into it.
Agreed.
Okay, we're going to take a quick commercial break. Everybody raised the prospect of these layoffs from Algoma. We're going to talk about that after the break. Stay right there. More Front Bench just ahead.
The Prime Minister looked them in the eye and promised he would protect their jobs, that he would negotiate a win, and I quote, have a deal by July 21st, but it was a bait and switch that is costing people their livelihoods.
Our thoughts are with the workers affected by the unjustified and unjustifiable tariffs. We absolutely have every confidence in the Algoma workers as they're going through this hardship, and we will make sure that we support them.
Debate in the House of Commons after Algoma Steel announced it's cutting a third of its workforce in Sault Ste. Marie. The feds in Ontario have put up $500 million in loans to help the company adapt very recently in the face of tariffs. So what could the layoffs mean politically? Let's bring back the Front Bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. I mean, Brian, obviously we talked to the union earlier. The layoffs mean a whole lot to the families of people who will lose their jobs as of March. There's a lot of concern in the community that there isn't the ability to absorb those jobs at all. What did you think of that exchange in the House? And where does the government go on this?
It didn't feel like the government had any specifics to use to defend itself. Now, to be fair, they might have been scrambling a little bit to find out exactly how they're going to sort of communicate what they did and what they will do. Look, my sense is that there's a bit of 1,000 points of light here happening in the sense that I think these individual bad news items for the economy, obviously not good, obviously not a good day from a political point of view for the government. Of course, I'm skipping over the not a good day for the workers, but I think that a lot of Canadians will say to themselves, look, we get it, there's a trade war, et cetera, et cetera. That said, 1,000 points of light, meaning that you can only have so many of these until the economy really starts to suffer, until the vast majority really start to feel it. And I think that's when the real kind of political shoe will drop. So it is, I think, something that the government has to be incredibly worrisome from a political point of view, worried about. And with that, also, in this case, it looks a little murky on the type of support they had provided. Yes. And if that was the right type of support, if they protected taxpayers' money, if they actually did something that was going to help ensure the workers would be able to have their jobs. So I think that's another element, 1,000 points of light. that's another point for sure.
Yeah, I think on this one, Benzie, like that sticks out to me because there's for both governments, to be fair, Ontario and the federal government, right? Like there's a lifeline provided very recently through loans, but the union representative we had on spoke of other sort of financial incentives that the governments have put on the table, in which the union was kind of begging for there to be conditions attached, and it doesn't appear like there were any. And this is kind of a familiar refrain by now.
Yeah. Exactly, Vashi. This is a very similar situation to Stellantis and the car factory in Brampton, the Jeep factory there. And this speaks to the limits of what governments can and cannot do to save private industries. But it also speaks to the fact that governments need to really, really have ironclad agreements with these companies before we bail them out. We saw, they're threatening legal action against Stellantis over that, the fact that Jeep Compass is not going to be manufactured in Brampton anymore. As the union leader was saying to you, Vashi, there were more things that the government could have done to ensure that the $500 million or the $400 million in federal money and $100 million in provincial money went to protect the workers, not just the company. It's a very, very difficult situation. And Brian's right. Like the government they looked a little flat-footed, I thought today. Melanie Joly did. But again, there are a lot of these, and there may be more coming because Donald Trump has just caused absolute chaos for our economy.
Well, and I think this sort of speaks to like what Brian was saying, Tom, about it may not happen all at once, but there's the Stellantis story, the other car stories. Like this is, just last week, if we can remember, a few days ago, the Prime Minister was making announcements meant to help reinforce a turn to the domestic industry for steel because they have completely lost the American market. And now this sort of they're confronted with this economic reality.
Exactly. And, because I was head of the NDP and we're very close to those unions, including the steelworkers, I know that factory. I've been there. I've met those workers. And it's heartbreaking. It really is truly heartbreaking to see so close to the holiday season on top of everything else, people just being said, well, what are we going to do? Because these are good jobs. People are trained up to them and they're held on. These are lifetime jobs in many cases. And then just 1,000 families facing that. It's too much. I do think that the federal government actually got some parts of this right, because instead of handing out cash, a loan guarantee requires the company to use its own credit, but you're going to back them up on it. And I don't think that we had the time to build something where we could actually start giving grants, for example. And I think that overall, it was probably the wisest course in a very rough sea, because you're trying to build something that's never been built before in response to something that's never happened to Canada before. The other thing was, of course, excluding steel from countries with which we don't have free trade agreements, essentially making it impossible for them to get into the Canadian market. We're hurting them, obviously, but we're being hurt so badly right now, and the proof of that is what just happened at Algoma. I'm afraid that Brian's right. I'm afraid that this is the beginning of something. There will be far more of these cases. There's an old saying that, it's a recession when I lose, when my neighbor loses his job. It's a depression when I lose my job. But what we're starting to see now is people going through that. And there have been tough times before. We've had 10% and 12% unemployment before in Canada. We know what this stuff looks like. But we've never had our closest neighbor intentionally harming our economy, which is what we're going through now. And I refer us back to our previous discussion. We've got to use what we've got, including our natural resources, which is this great blessing that we have in this country. Got to do it wisely, but we've got to do it quickly, because otherwise the entire economy could start to tank.
You see also the sort of disproportionate impact on the sectors that are being punished, right, that aren't covered by CUSMA, that have these 232 tariffs, like steel, like autos. Lisa, I heard you nodding when Tom said he'd been to the factory. Like, this is a third of the workforce in an area where, as the union representative on, like, as I was saying, he said, like, the community cannot absorb this. There aren't enough open jobs there. Even the ones at the mines, he said, are getting overrun by applications right now. Like, that is very consequential.
It is. And I lived through it in the 80s in Cape Breton. We lost the coal mines. We lost the steel plant. We lost the cod fishery. The island has never, ever recovered, And we've had multiple amounts of government programming going in there. And it's devastating to watch a town like Sault Ste. Marie go through the exact same thing. And this is where careless thoughts or careless words like I don't care from the Prime Minister is going to come back to haunt him, because those links are going to be made. They knew this was coming because we don't have a deal on steel. Loan guarantees are only helpful when the company knows they're actually going to have revenues to repay the loans. If you don't have revenues coming in, nobody's going to give you a loan, even if you have a government guarantee. That's what they're up against. And without having some kind of path forward on these steel tariffs, they're not going to have any kind of possibility of putting a business plan together to get the loans. So they need more. And I don't know what the government can possibly do. But I can tell you this, that whoever wrote those lines in question period today, they better go back to the drawing board, because they were completely unacceptable. To put the burden on the worker to have to chin up and get through it is ridiculous. This is a huge problem for our country. The Prime Minister has to stand up in the House and has to address it. This is the beginning, and people are scared, Vashi. This is going to be a crappy Christmas for a lot of people who are in these sectors in this country, because they're seeing the writing on the wall. And I just say, God bless you all. It's going to be tough.
For sure. Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Ray, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. We'll take a very quick commercial break here on Power Play. On the other end of that break, the Angus Reid Institute has brand new public opinion data out just post that Alberta-Ottawa MOU on a pipeline. How is that MOU landing? Shashi Kurl will tell us next.
I support that if the provinces and the Indigenous peoples are in agreement, that then there is a pathway to actually make that happen. But I am not
what
going
happened?
For a pipeline. But
Thank
what
you
I'm
very
saying,
much, Minister.
but I think it's really important. I would not override Indigenous peoples' agreement, and I would not override the province of British Columbia, which is what the Conservatives say they would do.
That's Environment Minister Julie DeBruzen taking questions from her peers today on the federal government's Memorandum of Understanding with Alberta on energy, a deal that would see Ottawa drop clean energy regulations in the province in exchange for Alberta negotiating an increased industrial carbon tax. How might that be playing out for voters? Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute, and she's got some fresh data for us. Hi, Shachi. Great to see you as always.
Here we go again,
Bashi. What are you seeing? Yeah, here we go. Here we go. What are you seeing at the top line?
You know, the top line is telling a couple of different stories. Like at the top of the top line, on the surface of the water, actually very little has changed in terms of the national vote intent picture. The Liberals are up by a couple, 3 points over the Conservatives. But if I look at the last time we measured this, it's all within margin of error. So, you know, not a lot of significant change. Carney's own stability in terms of prime ministerial approval, he's not up, he's not down. He's still at 52%. He's up a little bit in Alberta, surprise, surprise, not so surprise. But then he's also pretty stable in British Columbia in terms of that approval number. But as we know, Vashi, approval isn't always a predictor of vote. And so one of the things I would say is there is a pretty significant red flag emerging out of British Columbia. I think it's too soon to call it a worrying trend, but certainly it's a worrying sign. We're seeing both the federal Liberal Party weakening and softening in terms of vote intention support in BC. And if you look at what that looks like in Metro Vancouver, wow, the federal Liberals are off quite a bit over the last several months, almost down almost 15 points. And of course, in polling, when you're talking about urban centers, you can have a little bit more volatility just because of the methodology and the way you do this. But it is enough to say, nope, people are choosing to go in different directions and take their support in different places. And in Metro Vancouver, which is really vote rich, right? It's half the province and it returns a lot of seats. You're seeing a couple of different trends. More past Liberal voters are actually moving into the undecided column. They're saying, I really don't know who I'd support in a situation like this. Some are moving over to the Greens. Not surprising again, given that pipeline opposition that you and I talked about on Thursday. And where cost of living continues to be such a key issue, we're seeing the Conservatives pick up a few points again in Metro Vancouver.
So what do you attribute? Like, I know there's obviously different component parts, but that's pretty substantial.
It is quite
like
substantial.
It's well outside of statistical. Yeah.
Oh yeah. No. That's why I'm calling it a big red flag.
Yeah.
So this is where I would say, yes, absolutely, you can attribute some of this, a lot of this. Remember, we were in field after that MOU announcement. So, yes, some of this is absolutely reaction to the MOU announcement, to, hey, let's go build a pipeline, let's find some proponents. When you and I talked last week about that 53% of British Columbians who say they would be open to the idea of a northern pipeline route between Alberta and British Columbia, we also talked about the political divide on that. That is very strongly driven by right-of-center voters. So right-of-center voters are going to say, yeah, great idea. Nice job, Mr. Carney. We're still going to vote Conservative at the end of this. On the other hand, if you have that coalition, which we saw in April of this year, in the federal election, of NDP voters who abandoned the party in a Stop the Conservatives movement, of Green voters who either stayed home or abandoned Elizabeth May in a Stop the Conservatives movement. We're starting to see that vote dissipate, either move into the undecided column or move over to the Greens. The Greens have now doubled their vote in BC, although I think it's really important to point out they're still in the single digits. But then again, it's not just about the pipelines. You're also seeing some of that support bleed back to the Conservatives. And I can I attribute that to one single thing? No, but housing affordability, cost of living, still really big, impactful issues that, despite all kinds of announcements that we've heard out of the Liberal government, despite the budget, not really punching through in terms of that really wicked problem. People still are worried about their mortgages, their rent, holding on to jobs, being able to afford to buy nice things for Christmas.
Makes sense. Shachi, thanks so much. Appreciate those brand new numbers. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. As you heard her say, there are not a ton of movement nationally since November 7th, but quite a bit of movement in the province of BC. We'll take a quick commercial break here on Power Play. More just after that break. Welcome back to Power Play. We continue to track the news out of Sault Ste. Marie. 1,000 layoff notices issued by Algoma Steel, about a third of the company's workforce there. Certainly a statement from the federal jobs minister that says, in part, the federal government is standing with Algoma Steel workers and with Canada's steel sector. The situation, Minister Patty Hadu writes, is serious. Global markets are shifting quickly, and relying too heavily on a single trading partner has left our industry exposed. She writes, we are working hard to shore up domestic production and make sure workers have real immediate support. Of course, the union leader we spoke to earlier on is asking the government to offer more conditions on any financial support to the company. We'll leave Power Play there. Lots more reaction coming up on CTV News Channel. Thanks for watching.